Welcome to the channel Thoughts of Alan Watts. Tonight we are going to explore something almost every human being feels, yet almost no one truly understands. Loneliness. That strange feeling that appears in the quiet moments of life, when the phone is silent, when the room is dark, when there is no one to distract the mind. Before this talk truly begins, I want you to imagine something. Tonight, after this video ends, you turn off the screen. The room becomes quiet. There is no music, no voices, no notifications, just silence. And for a moment, you are alone with your thoughts. Most people do not like this moment. They reach for their phone. They turn on music. They search for something to distract themselves. But tonight, I want you to stay there, just for a moment, because what you might discover in that silence could change the way you understand your entire life. Welcome to the channel Thoughts of Alan Watts. On this channel, we explore the deepest philosophical ideas about the mind, consciousness, and the nature of reality. And tonight, we explore a question that touches nearly every human being. Why are people afraid of being alone? Millions of people feel loneliness every day, even in crowded cities, even in relationships, even surrounded by friends. Loneliness appears in the quiet moments of life, late at night, during long walks, or in the strange silence after a conversation ends. Most people assume loneliness means something is missing. They believe the solution is simple: find more friends, find a partner, stay busy. But according to the ideas of Alan Watts, loneliness is not really about other people. Loneliness is something much deeper. It is connected to the way the mind sees itself. And once you begin to understand this, something remarkable happens. The fear of being alone begins to dissolve. Chapter 1. The Human Fear of Silence. Human beings have a strange relationship with silence. Animals seem comfortable with it. A cat can sit quietly for hours. A bird can rest on a branch without doing anything. But humans? The moment silence appears, something interesting happens. The mind becomes restless. People begin searching for stimulation, music, conversation, scrolling through endless videos, anything to avoid the quiet. Why? Because silence reveals something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: their own mind. When the environment becomes quiet, the mind becomes loud. Thoughts begin to appear, memories from the past, worries about the future, questions that have no easy answers. And for many people, this experience feels uncomfortable, sometimes even frightening. So they escape. They fill their lives with noise, constant activity, constant distraction. But here is the strange paradox. The more we run from our thoughts, the stronger they become. The mind becomes like a room that is never cleaned. Old memories pile up, unresolved emotions accumulate, and eventually, being alone feels overwhelming. But according to Alan Watts, the problem is not the mind itself. The problem is that most people have never learned how to observe it. Chapter 2. The Story of Me. From the moment we are born, we begin learning something about ourselves. People give us a name, they tell us who we are, they describe our personality, they describe our role in the world. Little by little, we build a mental picture of ourselves. My name is this. My life looks like this. I am this kind of person. This mental picture becomes what psychologists often call the ego. But the word ego does not mean arrogance. It simply means the story we tell about ourselves. Your ego is the collection of ideas you carry about who you think you are, your history, your identity, your personality. But here is something fascinating. This story is not fixed. It changes over time. Think about who you were 5 years ago. Your thoughts were different. Your beliefs were different. Even your fears were different. And yet, something inside you remained the same. The observer, the awareness behind the story. According to Alan Watts, this awareness is much closer to your true nature than the story of the ego. But most people confuse the two. They believe the story is who they truly are. And when that story feels threatened, fear appears. Chapter 3. Why the ego feels lonely. The ego is built on comparison. It constantly measures itself against others. Am I successful enough? Am I attractive enough? Do people respect me? Do I belong? These questions create a constant sense of pressure. Because the ego depends on recognition. It wants validation, approval, attention. Without these things, the ego feels uncertain. And that uncertainty can feel like loneliness. But notice something important. This kind of loneliness is not created by physical isolation. You can feel it even in a crowd, even at a party, even in a relationship. Because the ego is not satisfied by presence alone. It wants reassurance. And reassurance is temporary. For a moment, attention feels good. But then the mind begins asking again, am I still accepted? Do they still like me? The cycle continues, and this endless search for validation becomes exhausting. But Alan Watts suggested something radical. He said the ego is not who you really are. It is simply a social mask, a useful tool for interacting with society. But it is not the deepest level of your identity. And once you realize this, something interesting begins to happen. The fear of loneliness starts to weaken. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Separation. Most people believe something that seems obvious. They believe they are separate from the universe. You are inside your body, and the world exists outside you. This assumption feels natural. But Alan Watts believed this idea creates one of the greatest illusions in human experience. Because if you believe you are separate from everything else, you will inevitably feel alone. Imagine standing in a vast universe as an isolated individual, a small mind trapped inside a fragile body, surrounded by an enormous world. That perspective naturally creates anxiety and loneliness. But Watts proposed a different way of seeing things. He suggested that the self is not a separate observer of the universe. Instead, the self is something the universe is doing. Just as the ocean produces waves, the universe produces people. A wave does not exist separately from the ocean, and in the same way, you do not exist separately from the universe. You are an expression of it, a temporary form through which the universe experiences itself. Chapter 5. The moment loneliness disappears. Think about a moment when you felt completely connected to the world, perhaps while watching the sunset, or standing near the ocean, or walking alone through a quiet forest. In moments like these, something interesting happens. The usual chatter of the mind becomes quiet. The sense of separation fades, and for a brief moment, you feel part of something vast. Loneliness disappears, not because someone joined you, but because the boundary between you and the world becomes less rigid. These experiences reveal something important. Loneliness is not simply the absence of people. It is the presence of a certain way of thinking. A way of thinking that divides reality into separate fragments. Me, you, the world. But when that division softens, a sense of connection naturally appears. Chapter 6. The Mind as a Storyteller. The human mind is a storyteller. It constantly interprets experience. It creates explanations. It creates narratives. And these narratives shape how we feel. Imagine two people sitting alone in the same room. One person thinks, "I am alone because nobody cares about me." The other thinks, "I am alone because I finally have time to reflect." The situation is identical, but the experience is completely different. Why? Because the mind tells a different story. And once you begin observing this process, you realize something fascinating. The mind is not always describing reality. Often, it is simply interpreting it, sometimes incorrectly, sometimes dramatically, sometimes based on old fears. But the moment you see this clearly, the power of those stories begins to weaken. Chapter 7. The Freedom of Observing the Mind. There is a simple but powerful shift that can transform your relationship with loneliness. Instead of fighting your thoughts, observe them. Watch them the way you would watch clouds moving across the sky. A thought appears, it stays for a moment, and then it disappears. Another thought replaces it. Most people assume they are the thinker of their thoughts, but if you observe carefully, something surprising becomes clear. Thoughts appear on their own. You do not deliberately create most of them. They simply arise and fade, just like sounds, just like sensations. When you see this clearly, a sense of distance appears between you and the mind. You realize something profound. You are not the thoughts. You are the awareness observing them. And that awareness is never lonely. Chapter 8. Why the Mind Fears Stillness. There is something very unusual about the modern human mind. It is rarely still. From the moment people wake up in the morning, their attention is immediately pulled in different directions. Messages, news, videos, tasks, plans for the day. The mind becomes busy almost instantly, and this busyness feels normal. But if you examine it carefully, something becomes obvious. Most people are not actually comfortable with stillness. Stillness removes distraction, and when distraction disappears, something long buried begins to surface. Unfinished thoughts, old emotions, questions that were never answered. The mind suddenly has space to reveal what has been hidden beneath the noise. And this is the moment when many people begin to feel uneasy. They feel restless. They feel the urge to do something, anything, to escape the silence. But the silence itself is not the problem. The discomfort comes from encountering the mind without filters. Alan Watts often suggested that people fear silence for the same reason they fear darkness. Not because darkness is dangerous, but because we do not know what might appear within it. Chapter 9. The Addiction to Distraction. Modern life offers an endless supply of distraction. At any moment you can open a screen and enter another world. Endless information, endless entertainment, endless stimulation. And while these things are not inherently harmful, they can easily become a habit, a reflex, a way of avoiding the present moment. Many people spend their entire lives moving from one distraction to another. Work, social media, entertainment, conversation. And yet, despite all this activity, the underlying feeling of restlessness often remains. Because distraction does not solve the deeper problem, it simply postpones it. Imagine a room filled with scattered objects. Instead of organizing the room, you turn off the lights. For a moment, the mess disappears, but it is still there. And the same thing happens with the mind. Distraction hides the noise temporarily, but it does not resolve it. Eventually, the lights come back on, and the thoughts return. Chapter 10. The Moment You Stop Running. There comes a moment in many people's lives when something changes. They grow tired of constant distraction, tired of endless noise, tired of the feeling that something important is always being avoided. And in that moment, they decide to do something unusual. They stop running. They sit quietly, perhaps for the first time in years, and the mind begins to reveal itself. At first, the experience may feel chaotic. Thoughts appear rapidly. Old memories surface. Emotions arise unexpectedly. It may feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming. But if the person continues to observe, something remarkable happens. The storm begins to settle. Thoughts slow down. The mind becomes clearer, and a deeper awareness begins to emerge. This awareness was always present, but it was hidden beneath constant activity. Like the surface of a lake disturbed by wind. When the wind stops, the water becomes still, and the depth of the lake becomes visible. Chapter 11. The Difference Between Thinking and Awareness. Most people assume that thinking and awareness are the same thing, but they are not. Thinking is a process, a movement of ideas, a flow of words and images inside the mind. Awareness, however, is something different. Awareness is the space in which thinking appears. It is the quiet background behind every thought. You can notice this right now. A thought appears, then it disappears. Another thought replaces it. But the awareness observing the thoughts remains constant. It does not come and go. It is simply present, like the sky behind passing clouds. Alan Watts often pointed out that people mistakenly identify themselves with their thoughts. They say, "I am anxious, I am lonely, I am worried." But in reality, these experiences are temporary mental events. They appear within awareness. And once you begin to recognize this difference, your relationship with the mind changes dramatically. Thoughts lose some of their authority. They become movements rather than identities. and loneliness begins to transform. Chapter 12. Why People Seek Constant Company. Humans are social creatures. Connection with others is natural and meaningful. But there is a difference between enjoying company and needing it to escape oneself. For many people, constant social interaction becomes a way of avoiding inner silence. When others are present, attention moves outward. Conversation fills the space. Laughter fills the space. Activity fills the space. And the mind temporarily forgets its own noise. But when the social environment disappears, the inner world returns. And if someone has never learned to be comfortable with that inner world, loneliness appears immediately. This is why some people feel uneasy when they spend even a short time alone. It is not the physical solitude that troubles them, it is the sudden encounter with their own mind. But solitude, when approached differently, can become something entirely different. Instead of a threat, it can become a doorway. Chapter 13. The Hidden Gift of Solitude. Solitude has played an important role in the lives of many thinkers, artists, and philosophers. When external noise disappears, a deeper level of creativity often appears. Ideas become clearer. Perception becomes sharper. The mind begins to explore questions that daily life rarely allows. In solitude, people rediscover something simple but profound: their own presence. Not the social identity, not the roles they play, but the quiet awareness beneath all those layers. This awareness does not require validation. It does not need applause. It does not depend on comparison. It simply exists. And in that space, loneliness slowly transforms into something else, a sense of quiet completeness. Chapter 14. The Illusion of Control. Another reason the mind fears solitude is connected to control. The ego prefers predictable situations. It wants to understand everything, plan everything, manage everything. But the deeper layers of the mind do not always follow those rules. When you sit quietly, unexpected thoughts may appear, old memories, forgotten emotions, ideas that challenge your usual way of thinking. For the ego, this feels uncomfortable because it cannot fully control what appears. But Alan Watts suggested something important. The attempt to control the mind completely is itself the source of tension. It is like trying to smooth the surface of water with your hands. The more you struggle, the more disturbance you create. But if you simply allow the water to settle, it becomes still on its own. The same principle applies to the mind. Observation brings clarity. Struggle creates chaos. Chapter 15. When Loneliness Becomes a Teacher. Most people see loneliness as an enemy, something to escape, something to eliminate. But what if loneliness is actually a signal, a message from the deeper mind, a sign that attention has been focused entirely outward for too long? Loneliness invites a different direction, inward, toward self-understanding, toward awareness, toward the quiet presence that exists beneath all social roles. When someone begins exploring this inner space, they often discover something surprising. The loneliness they feared was not emptiness. It was space. Space that had never been explored. space where new understanding could emerge. And once that exploration begins, the relationship with solitude changes completely. Chapter 16. The Beginning of Inner Peace. As the mind becomes more familiar with stillness, a subtle shift occurs. Silence no longer feels threatening. Instead, it begins to feel restorative, like resting after a long journey. Thoughts continue to appear, of course. The mind does not suddenly stop thinking, but the relationship with those thoughts changes. They are no longer overwhelming. They are simply movements, temporary waves in the ocean of awareness. And in that recognition, a deeper peace begins to develop. Not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden enlightenment, but a quiet understanding. The understanding that being alone does not mean being disconnected from life, because the awareness observing your thoughts is already connected to everything. Chapter 17. The Strange Idea of Time. There is another hidden reason why people feel lonely, and it has something to do with the way the human mind understands time. Most people believe that life is a long line, the past behind them, the future ahead of them, and somewhere in the middle, there is the present moment. But if you examine this carefully, something interesting appears. The past only exists as memory. The future only exists as imagination. And the present is the only moment that is actually real. Yet most people spend very little time living in the present. Their minds are constantly traveling through time. They replay conversations from yesterday. They imagine situations that might happen tomorrow. They worry about things that have not happened yet, or they regret things that cannot be changed. And while all this thinking happens, the present moment quietly passes by, unnoticed. This constant movement through time creates tension, because the mind is always somewhere else, never fully here. And when attention is not rooted in the present, a strange feeling begins to grow, a feeling of disconnection, a feeling that life is happening somewhere else. This is one of the subtle sources of loneliness, not physical loneliness, but psychological distance from the present moment. Chapter 18. Why the present moment feels uncomfortable. If the present moment is the only place where life truly exists, why do people avoid it? The answer is surprisingly simple. The present moment does not contain the stories that the ego enjoys. The ego thrives on narrative. It likes to think about the past. It likes to imagine the future, because those stories strengthen the identity of the self. They reinforce the idea, this is my life, this is my journey, this is my personal story. But the present moment is different. In pure presence, the story disappears. There is only experience, the sound of a voice, the feeling of breathing, the sensation of sitting in a room. No past, no future, just awareness. And for a mind that is used to constant storytelling, this simplicity can feel unfamiliar, almost empty. But this emptiness is not negative. It is actually a form of freedom. Because when the story stops, the ego relaxes, and something deeper becomes visible. Chapter 19. The Universe Experiencing Itself. Alan Watts often described human consciousness in a very unusual way. He suggested that the universe is not something separate from us. Instead, The universe is something we are participating in. Imagine the ocean producing waves. Each wave has a unique shape, a unique movement, but every wave is still water. The wave cannot exist without the ocean, and the ocean expresses itself through the wave. Watts suggested that human beings are similar. Each person appears to be an individual, a separate identity, a separate life. But at a deeper level, we are expressions of the same cosmic process. The universe exploring itself through billions of different perspectives, through different minds, different experiences, different lives. When seen from this perspective, something interesting happens. The idea of absolute separation becomes difficult to maintain. You are not a stranger in the universe. You are an event within it, just like a star, just like a cloud, just like a wave. Chapter 20. The Moment of Realization. Sometimes this understanding arrives suddenly, not as an intellectual idea, but as a direct experience. A moment when the usual sense of separation fades, perhaps during deep reflection, perhaps while observing nature, perhaps during a quiet moment when the mind becomes completely still. And suddenly, the boundary between you and the world becomes less solid. There is simply experience happening, sounds, sensations, awareness, without the usual feeling of being a separate observer. These moments are often described as peaceful, expansive, deeply meaningful. Not because something supernatural occurs, but because the mind temporarily stops dividing reality into fragments. The observer and the observed become part of the same process. And in that moment, loneliness disappears completely. Because loneliness depends on the belief that the observer is isolated. When that belief fades, connection becomes obvious. Chapter 21. Why the Mind Returns to Separation. If this realization is possible, why do people return to ordinary thinking? Why does the sense of separation come back? The answer is simple. Habit. The human mind has been trained since childhood to think in certain ways. We learn language. We learn categories. We learn to divide the world into objects and identities. These patterns are extremely useful for everyday life, but they also reinforce the idea of a separate self. So even after moments of deep insight, the mind naturally returns to familiar habits. It begins telling the story again. My life, my problems, my identity. But once you have glimpsed the deeper perspective, something changes permanently. Even when the story returns, you know it is only a story, a useful narrative, not the ultimate truth. Chapter 22. The Fear of Losing the Self. One of the biggest fears people experience when encountering these ideas is the fear of losing themselves. If the ego is not the true self, then what am I? If the story is only a narrative, then who is living the life? These questions can feel unsettling because the ego interprets them as a threat. But in reality, nothing is lost. The personality continues to exist. Your name still exists. Your memories still exist. Your relationships still exist. The difference is subtle. Instead of believing the story completely, you see it more clearly. You recognize that the self is both real and temporary. Like a character in a play, the character is meaningful. The character has a story. But behind the character, there is an actor. And behind the actor, there is awareness itself. Chapter 23. The Beauty of Existence. When the mind begins to relax its rigid sense of separation, something beautiful happens. Life becomes more vivid. Ordinary experiences feel richer. A simple walk becomes interesting. A quiet room becomes peaceful. The sound of rain becomes fascinating. Because attention is no longer trapped inside constant mental stories. It becomes open, curious, present. And this openness reveals something that was always there: the incredible complexity of existence, the movement of clouds, the rhythm of breathing, the quiet intelligence within nature, all of it unfolding continuously. And you are not outside this process. You are part of it, a temporary but meaningful expression of the same unfolding universe. Chapter 24. The End of the Search. Many people spend their lives searching for something: happiness, meaning, completion. They believe that once they find the right relationship, career, or achievement, they will finally feel whole. But the deeper realization suggested by philosophers like Alan Watts is different. Wholeness was never missing. The feeling of incompleteness was created by the belief in separation. Once that belief begins to dissolve, the search relaxes. Life continues. Goals still exist. Relationships still matter. But the desperate need to complete oneself disappears. Because at the deepest level, nothing was broken to begin with. Chapter 25. The Moment You Stop Fighting Yourself. There is a quiet moment that many people experience at least once in their lives. It does not arrive with fireworks. It does not announce itself dramatically. Instead, it appears slowly, almost unnoticed. It is the moment when a person becomes tired of fighting their own mind. For years, perhaps decades, the mind has been treated like an enemy. Unwanted thoughts appear, and the person tries to push them away. Difficult emotions arise, and the person tries to suppress them. But eventually, something changes. A simple realization appears. The struggle itself is exhausting. And in that moment, the person stops resisting. They allow the mind to be exactly as it is. Thoughts come, thoughts go. Emotions appear, emotions fade. And for the first time, there is no war inside. This does not mean the mind becomes perfectly calm, but the relationship with it changes. Instead of trying to control every movement, you begin to watch. And in that watching, a deeper form of peace begins to grow. Chapter 26. Accepting the Human Experience. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about inner peace is the belief that it means the absence of negative emotions. They imagine a peaceful mind as a mind that never feels sadness, fear, or confusion. But this is not realistic. Human experience includes a wide range of emotions: joy, curiosity, love, but also sadness, uncertainty, loneliness. The goal of understanding the mind is not to eliminate these experiences. It is to relate to them differently. When emotions are resisted, they become stronger. When they are allowed to move naturally, they often pass more quickly. Like weather moving through the sky. A storm arrives. The sky becomes dark. Rain falls. But eventually, the storm moves on. The sky does not fight the storm. It simply allows it. And the same principle applies to the mind. Awareness allows emotions to appear and disappear without turning them into permanent struggles. Chapter 27. Loneliness as a doorway. Imagine experiencing loneliness in a completely different way. Instead of immediately escaping it, you pause. You observe the feeling carefully. Where does it appear in the body? Is it a tightness in the chest? A heaviness in the stomach? A sense of emptiness in the mind? By observing the sensation directly, something interesting happens. The feeling becomes clearer, more precise, and often less overwhelming. Because loneliness, like all emotions, is not a permanent state. It is a temporary experience moving through awareness. But when the mind labels the experience with a dramatic story, "I will always be alone, nobody understands me, something is wrong with me," then the emotion becomes amplified. The story turns a temporary feeling into a long-lasting identity. But when the story is removed, the emotion becomes just a sensation, and sensations always change. Chapter 28. The Silence That Heals. Silence has a remarkable quality. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, especially for a mind that is used to constant stimulation. But if someone remains in silence long enough, something subtle begins to happen. The nervous system begins to slow down. Breathing becomes deeper. Attention becomes softer. The body relaxes. And within this quiet environment, the mind begins to reorganize itself. Thoughts become less chaotic. Emotions become easier to understand. It is almost as if silence gives the mind space to repair itself. This is one of the reasons many traditions throughout history have valued moments of solitude, not as punishment, but as nourishment, a chance for the mind to reset, to return to balance. Chapter 29. The Discovery of Inner Space. When people begin exploring silence regularly, they often discover something surprising. The mind contains far more space than they expected. At first, thoughts appear continuously, but as attention becomes calmer, small gaps begin to appear between those thoughts. Tiny moments of quiet awareness, moments when there is simply presence, no commentary, no judgment, just experience unfolding naturally. These gaps may last only a few seconds, but they reveal something profound. The mind is not a solid block of thinking, it is a flowing process. Thoughts arise, they pass, and between them, there is space. That space is awareness itself. And awareness is naturally peaceful, not because it forces peace, but because it is not disturbed by temporary movements of thought. Chapter 30. Life without constant resistance. Imagine living without constantly resisting your own experience. Not trying to force every moment to be perfect, not demanding that the mind always be calm. Instead, allowing life to move naturally. Pleasant experiences come, pleasant experiences go. Difficult experiences come, difficult experiences go. Through all of this movement, awareness remains steady. This does not mean life becomes passive. People still act, they still pursue goals, they still care about others. But their actions are no longer driven by fear of inner discomfort. They act from clarity instead of reaction. And this clarity creates a surprising sense of freedom. Freedom not from life, but within life. Chapter 31. The Natural State of Peace. Many people believe peace must be created. They imagine it as something distant, something that must be achieved through effort. But peace may actually be closer than we think. When the mind stops struggling against itself, peace appears naturally, not as an extraordinary experience, but as a quiet background state, like the calm surface of water when the wind stops blowing. Thoughts may still ripple across the surface, but the depth remains undisturbed. This depth is always present. It was there before the struggle began, and it remains when the struggle ends. Chapter 32. The Simple Truth. After exploring all these ideas, a very simple truth begins to emerge. Loneliness is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is not evidence that life has failed. Often it is simply a sign that the mind has become disconnected from the present moment, lost in stories, lost in comparison, lost in the belief of separation. But when attention returns to direct experience, breathing, sensation, awareness itself, the sense of separation begins to soften, and connection becomes visible again. Not connection to a particular person, but connection to existence itself. The same existence that moves through every living thing. The same existence that is expressing itself through you right now. Chapter 25. The moment you stop fighting yourself. There is a quiet moment that many people experience at least once in their lives. It does not arrive with fireworks. It does not announce itself dramatically. Instead, it appears slowly, almost unnoticed. It is the moment when a person becomes tired of fighting their own mind. For years, perhaps decades, the mind has been treated like an enemy. Unwanted thoughts appear, and the person tries to push them away. Difficult emotions arise, and the person tries to suppress them. But eventually, something changes. A simple realization appears. The struggle itself is exhausting, and in that moment, the person stops resisting. They allow the mind to be exactly as it is. Thoughts come, thoughts go. Emotions appear, emotions fade. And for the first time, there is no war inside. This does not mean the mind becomes perfectly calm, but the relationship with it changes. Instead of trying to control every movement, you begin to watch. And in that watching, a deeper form of peace begins to grow. Chapter 26. Accepting the Human Experience. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about inner peace is the belief that it means the absence of negative emotions. They imagine a peaceful mind as a mind that never feels sadness, fear, or confusion. But this is not realistic. Human experience includes a wide range of emotions: joy, curiosity, love, but also sadness, uncertainty, loneliness. The goal of understanding the mind is not to eliminate these experiences, It is to relate to them differently. When emotions are resisted, they become stronger. When they are allowed to move naturally, they often pass more quickly, like weather moving through the sky. A storm arrives. The sky becomes dark. Rain falls. But eventually, the storm moves on. The sky does not fight the storm. It simply allows it. And the same principle applies to the mind. Awareness allows emotions to appear and disappear without turning them into permanent struggles. Chapter 27. Loneliness as a doorway. Imagine experiencing loneliness in a completely different way. Instead of immediately escaping it, you pause. You observe the feeling carefully. Where does it appear in the body? Is it a tightness in the chest, a heaviness in the stomach, a sense of emptiness in the mind? By observing the sensation directly, something interesting happens. The feeling becomes clearer, more precise, and often less overwhelming. Because loneliness, like all emotions, is not a permanent state. It is a temporary experience moving through awareness. But when the mind labels the experience with a dramatic story, I will always be alone. Nobody understands me. Something is wrong with me. Then the emotion becomes amplified. The story turns a temporary feeling into a long-lasting identity. But when the story is removed, the emotion becomes just a sensation, and sensations always change. Chapter 28. The Silence That Heals. Silence has a remarkable quality. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, especially for a mind that is used to constant stimulation. But if someone remains in silence long enough, something subtle begins to happen. The nervous system begins to slow down. Breathing becomes deeper. Attention becomes softer. The body relaxes, and within this quiet environment, the mind begins to reorganize itself. Thoughts become less chaotic. Emotions become easier to understand. It is almost as if silence gives the mind space to repair itself. This is one of the reasons many traditions throughout history have valued moments of solitude, not as punishment, but as nourishment, a chance for the mind to reset, to return to balance. Chapter 29. The Discovery of Inner Space. When people begin exploring silence regularly, they often discover something surprising. The mind contains far more space than they expected. At first, thoughts appear continuously. But as attention becomes calmer, small gaps begin to appear between those thoughts. Tiny moments of quiet awareness. Moments when there is simply presence. No commentary, no judgment. Just experience unfolding naturally. These gaps may last only a few seconds, but they reveal something profound. The mind is not a solid block of thinking. It is a flowing process. Thoughts arise, they pass, and between them, there is space. That space is awareness itself. And awareness is naturally peaceful, not because it forces peace, but because it is not disturbed by temporary movements of thought. Chapter 30. Life without constant resistance. Imagine living without constantly resisting your own experience, not trying to force every moment to be perfect, not demanding that the mind always be calm. Instead, allowing life to move naturally. Pleasant experiences come, Pleasant experiences go. Difficult experiences come. Difficult experiences go. Through all of this movement, awareness remains steady. This does not mean life becomes passive. People still act. They still pursue goals. They still care about others. But their actions are no longer driven by fear of inner discomfort. They act from clarity instead of reaction. And this clarity creates a surprising sense of freedom. Freedom not from life, but within life. Chapter 31. The Natural State of Peace. Many people believe peace must be created. They imagine it as something distant, something that must be achieved through effort. But peace may actually be closer than we think. When the mind stops struggling against itself, peace appears naturally, not as an extraordinary experience, but as a quiet background state, like the calm surface of water when the wind stops blowing. Thoughts may still ripple across the surface, but the depth remains undisturbed. This depth is always present. It was there before the struggle began, and it remains when the struggle ends. Chapter 32. The Simple Truth. After exploring all these ideas, a very simple truth begins to emerge. Loneliness is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is not evidence that life has failed. Often it is simply a sign that the mind has become disconnected from the present moment, lost in stories, lost in comparison, lost in the belief of separation. But when attention returns to direct experience, breathing, sensation, awareness itself, the sense of separation begins to soften, and connection becomes visible again. Not connection to a particular person, but connection to existence itself. The same existence that moves through every living thing. The same existence that is expressing itself through you right now. Chapter 33. The End of the Search for Completeness. At some point in life, many people begin a search for meaning, a search for happiness, a search for something that will finally make life feel complete. Sometimes this search takes the form of ambition. People pursue success. They work tirelessly. They try to build a life that will finally make them feel satisfied. Other times, the search becomes emotional. People look for relationships that will remove their sense of emptiness. They hope that meeting the right person will solve the quiet discomfort they carry inside. But the deeper someone looks into this search, the more mysterious it becomes, because every achievement eventually becomes normal. Every exciting experience slowly fades into routine. Even the happiest relationships include moments of uncertainty. And so the search continues. Something still feels unfinished. But according to the philosophy we have explored tonight, this feeling may come from a simple misunderstanding. The belief that completeness is something we must obtain, something that exists somewhere in the future. But what if completeness was never missing? What if the feeling of incompleteness was created by the way the mind divides reality? When the mind constantly compares, I should be more successful. My life should look different. I should be happier. It creates a sense of distance between the present moment and an imagined ideal. And that distance feels like something is missing. But when comparison stops, something surprising becomes visible. Nothing is missing in the present moment. Breathing is happening. Life is unfolding. Awareness is here. and that awareness does not lack anything. Chapter 34. The Beauty of Ordinary Life. When people stop chasing the idea of a perfect future, they begin to notice something remarkable. Ordinary life becomes interesting again. The sound of wind moving through trees, the quiet rhythm of breathing, the warmth of sunlight through a window. Simple experiences that were previously ignored suddenly feel meaningful, not because they changed, but because attention changed. Instead of constantly searching for the next improvement, attention rests in what is already happening. And within this simple awareness, life reveals an unexpected beauty. Not dramatic beauty, not extraordinary beauty, but the subtle beauty of existence itself. The miracle that anything exists at all. The miracle that consciousness is able to observe it. The miracle that this moment is happening right now. Chapter 35. You were never separate. One of the most powerful realizations in the philosophy of Alan Watts is this: you were never truly separate from the universe. The feeling of being a completely isolated individual is largely a product of language and cultural conditioning. We say things like, my body, my mind, my life, as if these things belong to a separate owner. But if we examine reality more closely, the boundary between self and world becomes less clear. The air you breathe becomes part of your body. The food you eat becomes part of your body. The environment constantly flows through you. Your thoughts are influenced by everything you have ever experienced. The people you meet shape the way you think. The culture you grow up in shapes your identity. Even the atoms that form your body were once part of stars billions of years ago. Seen from this perspective, the idea of being completely separate begins to dissolve. You are not an isolated object. You are a process, a living event within a vast and continuous universe. Just as waves appear within the ocean, you appear within the cosmos. And like waves, you are made of the same substance as the ocean itself. Chapter 36. The Peace That Comes from Understanding. When this understanding begins to settle into the mind, something gentle happens. The need to constantly defend the ego begins to relax. The need to compare oneself with others becomes less intense. The need to control every aspect of life begins to soften, not because effort disappears, but because the underlying tension fades. Life is no longer experienced as a battle between the individual and the universe. Instead, it begins to feel like participation. You are participating in the unfolding of existence, just as every tree participates in the forest, just as every star participates in the galaxy. And once life is seen in this way, loneliness begins to lose its meaning, because loneliness assumes separation. But when separation is understood as an illusion, connection becomes the natural state. Chapter 37. The Quiet Mind. A quiet mind does not mean a mind without thoughts. Thoughts continue to appear, ideas arise, memories surface, plans for the future still exist, but these thoughts no longer dominate attention completely. They are seen more like passing clouds. Interesting, sometimes useful, but temporary. And between these clouds, there is always open sky. This open sky is awareness. It is not created. It is not forced. It is simply recognized. And once recognized, it becomes easier to return to it again and again, especially in moments of silence. At any moment, you can return to the present, not by forcing the mind to stop thinking, but by gently noticing what is already here. The sensation of breathing, the weight of your body sitting or lying down, the subtle sounds around you. These simple observations anchor attention in the present moment. And in the present moment, the mind naturally becomes calmer. Because the present does not contain the endless problems of imagined futures or the regrets of the past. It contains only what is happening right now. And right now, life is simply unfolding. The strange miracle of existence. If we step back and look at reality from a wider perspective, existence itself becomes mysterious. Out of an unimaginably vast universe, consciousness appears. Out of matter and energy, awareness emerges. And within that awareness, the entire story of human life unfolds. Thoughts, dreams, questions about meaning, questions about purpose, and perhaps the most fascinating question of all, what is this experience we call life? Philosophers, scientists, and spiritual teachers have explored this mystery for centuries. And although many different answers have been proposed, one simple observation remains undeniable. You are here, aware, experiencing this moment, and that alone is extraordinary. The final understanding. After exploring loneliness, the ego, awareness, and the nature of reality, we arrive at a quiet conclusion. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be chased. Understanding does not arrive through struggle. It arrives through observation, through curiosity, through the willingness to sit quietly and see what the mind is doing. And when the mind is observed without judgment, its patterns gradually reveal themselves. The fear of loneliness, the stories of the ego, the habit of constant comparison. Once these patterns are seen clearly, their power begins to fade, and what remains is something very simple: awareness, peaceful, present, connected to everything that exists. If you are listening to this right now, perhaps late at night, perhaps in a quiet room, take a moment before this video ends. Notice your breathing. Notice the space around you. Notice the simple fact that you are aware. Nothing more is required. No special experience, no dramatic realization, just awareness of this moment. Because within this moment, life is already complete, and the loneliness that once seemed so heavy may slowly begin to dissolve into something else. A quiet sense of belonging. Not belonging to a group, not belonging to an identity, but belonging to existence itself. Thank you for listening, and welcome again to Thoughts of Alan Watts.